that a saying that I always had on my wall was, if you can dream it, you can do it. Don't ever forget that. Set yourself some goals, and if you can dream about them, they are possible. They are. Go on and try. I listened to it. I just got back from San Antonio. I visited with a man at breakfast the other day, and his son was in the freshman class of high school and went to his dad and said, Dad, I'm not getting the kind of things I need in this school. I need to go to a different school. He said, what do you mean? Couldn't believe this from his ninth grade boy. So he said to him, well, if you can find a school, I'll check it out, I'll look at it, and we'll try. So the boy came back about 3 weeks later and said, Dad, I found the school. It was the Jesuit school of Dallas, Texas. And they lived fairly near Dallas, but it was going to cost Dad $6,000 for the tuition to go to high school. Dad said, I don't know if I can handle this or not. But let's try. First of all, he had to take an entrance exam. He had to get 90% on that entrance exam. And he did. He hadn't been a very good student so far in high school, but he didn't care because there wasn't anything going on in this high school that he wanted to learn anyway, he thought. So he did. The next thing was that he found out that they only accepted 250 freshman students. And then they told them that when those people got out of the freshman class to go on to the sophomore class, they would only take 210. So right away they knew there were 40 students that weren't going to make it. So what did you have to do to make it? Study. Not only did they have to study, and then when they went on to the sophomore class, there was only 175 of those sophomores that got to be juniors. And then, of course, there were 175 of those that got to be seniors because they didn't cut anybody else. But they cut every year. One of the things they had to do every year was 100 hours of community service and 100 hours of school service. So each year, working in the school, they sold tickets, they cleaned the floors, they washed the windows in the community, they went out to the hospitals and so forth. This is a young freshman boy that set a dream. Today is a doctor. His dream came true. So set a dream. If you can dream it, you can do it. I have famous people that I've known in this book. Cindy Orr, person that wrote a lot of poetry. This is my poetry. Oh, here's one. This one is Ben Gray. Famous people that I've known. Sarah Miller. Brett Bartholomew. I've got a lot more in here. These are famous people that I expect one day to have those dreams that they set come true. Chris Cluck. This is about our pet fish. Goldie's what we call our pet. I hope he goes to the vet. Blackie is my sister's fish. Goldrush is his favorite dish. Goldie is a little wild. Then I feed him chili. That's mild. I have one in here from Wally Taylor. How many of you know Wally Taylor? I'm not sure he set his dreams high enough because he told me last time I talked to him he still should be teaching. Snooky Clark. We know her as Snooky McGee. She was the nurse here for many years. Gone on. She's in Destin, Florida right now, walking the beach. Set your dreams high. You can go there. I'm going to go visit her next month. Hope to spend some fun. Keep your goals set high, boys and girls. And one of those kinds of things that you can do is the one you're doing right now. Researching and adding things to the Grout Museum will be one of the marvelous things that you do. Now, can I to answer questions, or am I to tell you about Dunkerton history without questions?
Why don't you start telling us first?
Okay. One of the most interesting things, and the people that you need to see, is Shirley Jones. She's the great-granddaughter of James Dunkerton. She still lives down here, so if you have a chance, be sure you go down. They tore the house down, and she built hers right where that one was at. But the oak trees that are down there in her yard are the oak trees that James Dunkerton planted when he came to town. And if you can stand under those oak trees and look down here at the creek, she will tell you the story of the Indians as they came one day up to her grandmother's house. They fenced their yard to keep the pigs out, not in. They didn't want the pigs in where they, so their livestock just kind of roamed around and wasn't fenced in at all. The Indians came and they always camped down on the creek just about where the rock dam is. So if you're ever down there looking, you might find some Indian artifacts. Shirley Jones went down there lots of times to look for something. I'll tell you in a minute. These squaws came up from the creek and they had their papoose with them, and they set the papoose down on the outside of the fence before they proceeded in where Grandma was at, and she was a little afraid. What did they want? All they wanted was some food. So she gave them some. When they turned around to go back out, the pigs had come up and snuffled to death the papoose that they had left on the fence. Well, they all went back down to the creek. And Grandpa came home in a little bit. Shirley always called him Grandpa. Grandpa came home later in the afternoon, and she told him, and stay in the house, Mama. Don't come out of the house. Just before dark, here came the Indian men. Which was scared. What did they want? They came up, came in the yard. All they wanted was the pig. So he gave them the pig. They took it back down to their campground and killed it and roasted it that night and never bothered them again. So think carefully about how scary it would have been to be in that situation. Think carefully about the dream that Mr. Dunkerton had coming to this land. When they got here and had to stake claim to this land, they had to walk all the way back to Dubuque if they didn't have transportation, and lots of them didn't have, to file their claim. He staked his claim in this area and owned most of the land around here. And at the time there was Barclay, where the church is just beyond was the town of Barclay. Paul Stabell's house at one time was the hotel that the stagecoach stopped at, only it wasn't in that place. They moved it down here. Back in the field, if you're really looking and hunting, you can still find the ruts of the stagecoach trail back through that field. Barclay was there. There was one over there. I can't remember the one that was over that direction, right past the flashing light. Lester was up here, where your grandpa's house is at. Straight up there was and the Lester Cemetery is about a mile behind where Chris used to live straight up on the highway here. That was the town of Lester. The people around all knew that the railroad was going to come through someplace. And so Mr. Dunkerton went to the railroad. He was a very golden-oriented man. He set his goals high. He said to the railroad, I will give you all the land that you need for the right-of-way of the railroad if you will build it on my land. I will give you the land, but you've got to name the depot after me. For land. At that time, land around here was about $2 an acre. Anybody know what it sells for now? $1,000 to $1,500 an acre. So he gave that to them. And eventually then, the depot's still down there with the name Dunkerton on it. But eventually, the people of Barclay said, ooh, look at how easy it is to ship stuff on the railroad, and all the people we're going to move there. And so the town of Barclay and Lester and the one over there north by the flashing light, the people just left, and pretty soon there was nothing left. So Dunkerton became the center then because they could ship grain, but they could get things that they needed from the east. Their plows and their tools and things like that that they didn't have when they started out with. So the town of Dunkerton then emerged as the one because it sat on the railroad. The people that dream these days don't dream about putting railroads in, but they dream about putting interstates in. And you've seen probably traveling around some of the towns that kind of just dwindle away, that the interstate kind of went around and said, sorry, we're not going to go through you. And so they lose a lot of business. Lots of the littler towns. So the people that are even running the town have to set some high goals and dream about what do I want to happen. Out to the flashing light and then on to Elk Run Road, down a mile, and then back is the Ray Hoffman farm. And their grandfather was Jacob Hoffman. He came by walking all the way. Mr. Dunkerton and his family first came from New York and settled in Illinois, and then came on from Illinois. Oh, there was lots of them. How many children there were in that first family? It wasn't Mr. Dunkerton, it was Canfield. Look, I have it here. But anyway, Mr. Hoffman came all the way from Dubuque walking. Remember, prairie grasses are like 10 foot tall. Of course, by that time there might have been a trail tall, but it's still quite a way. He was very tired. He sat down along a little creek out there, took off his shoes, was washing his feet in the creek. He was kind of down the bank a little ways, and he saw two men riding up in a buggy. So he didn't say anything. He sat there and he listened to them. They said, this is the piece of land we want. Let's go back to Cedar Falls and wait. We'll leave in the morning to go to the field. They had a buggy. He knew he had to get going, so he put his shoes right back on, started out, walked all night, headed for Dubuque. He got there before morning and sat down on the steps of the courthouse where he had to file his claim, and was the first one in the door when it opened that morning so that he could file his claim on that piece of land out there. Just as he was leaving to go out of that courthouse, there came the two men that had been flooded. Just by those few minutes, he would have lost that dream. But he knew he had to get it done. Don't put things off too long. Lots of people. Mrs. Bauer, Marie, and Linford, I think she had better cover than she did this, but she researched and went through her files and found out lots of different information. So she's got this kind of information. This belongs to Mrs. Nixdorf now. Mrs. Bauer put this publication in the library, but somebody checked it out and never brought it back. There's a piece back here that's the early schools. So any of you that are doing schools, I'm sure that there's, well, I know because this was mine. We copied this out of her book so we can make some more copies. Here's pictures of transportation. So there's articles about the transportation. And then here's a whole page of the pioneer families. So since this is something you can read about, I'm not going to read it all to you, but Eli Owen was one of the first people that came to Illinois before Mr. Dunkerton. And he had a brother, Jonathan Owen, and between them, he loaded his wife, Hannah, and their 9 children in a wagon and brought all of that stuff. Can't be very much, can it? 9 children? You couldn't hardly get any stuff in the wagon after you stuffed 9 children in. They had a 2-ox team, and they had made their way from New York to Illinois and then on to Iowa. He had 5 sons, so that counted for a lot of it, because when you came to Iowa then to get your land, you could get your 80 acres, and each son could get 80 acres, so that they could go on and do that Township, 4 miles north of Dunkerton. And you will find Eli Owens' grave at Western Cemetery. So that's a really neat place to spend some time with. Owen and 2 other young men, Philander Canfield. What's the name of that street out there? And Alonzo Barber. I don't think we have a Barber Street here, we do. They had lots of, then with all those children, they all filed their families. Until years ago, the ruts made by the wagons could still be seen on the Dean Whitney farm. And he lives on Newell Street. It's Donald Street. It's on Donald Street. He lives on Donald Street, just about a mile past the John Deere plant out there. Jonathan Owens claimed 80 acres, and his son Eli 40, and Canfield did his cabin on the Coleshell farm where Bob Michelson now lives. And I don't know, Bob Michelson is gone now, so I can't tell you for sure where that is. Emmer McGee owned the farm where Norbert Delagardelle lives, and that's farther north than where Chris's grandfather's farm is. Chris, who lives there now?
Rented it to Russell and Erickson.
And you still own that and rent that out, so, and that's a century-old farm. And Norbert lives on further, just before you turn your curve up here to go to Sigleco Park. So, lots of different kinds of things. Here's a picture of James Dunkerton. Mrs. Jones has lots of them that you get there. This goes on to talk about the businesses. And we talked a lot about, if you've read the Laurel Ingalls Wilders, when her father went to build this house in town when they were way out in by the shores of Silver Lake, false front. Why did they spend all time and effort to make the whole front of that out of wood when they could have just made their slanted? They put that great big front on their buildings. I've always wondered why. Come up with a good idea, let me know. There were lots of them, and it tells. One of the stories that Mrs. Jones has told about was down right next to, would be the toll gate, that building, and the building across where Mr. Smith has the electric company, was with the first 2 buildings to go up. They hired men to do this, and Mrs. Dunkerton, she was a pretty smart lady. Even though ladies didn't get to have land, they needed smart ladies to help. It was taking a long time to get this building going, and she said, I will fix a huge dinner for the team that gets their building fixed first. And they were building on this side where it's an empty lot by the toll gate. And well, the men building weren't too done either, because they said, what if we both finish at the same time? So they kind of put Mrs. Dunkerton in a spot, because that's exactly what they did. They worked it out so that the last nail in each building was at the very same time, so she had to fix meals for all of them. You suppose she cared? No, I'm sure she didn't. And they went out and hunted and got something to eat and those kinds of things, but still, it would be a big, big thing. Probably 20 people. Would you like to fix dinner for 20? You're going to probably do that next week. I'm not sure that there's any other kinds of things that I can just tell you about that. If you happen to be out by the Raymond Hoffman farm out there on Big Rock Road, those boys, which would be Ben, and John, and Ben and John. Yeah, there is, because the other 2 are Teresa Bartholomew, which is, and Buska. So those are the 4 children. They rebuilt that cabin, and you can go out there most any time and visit, and they have put real things from that time period into that cabin so that you can go out there and look. They have lots of students from the Waterloo schools, although since Waterloo is in such a financial situation, they haven't been coming lately. She would love to visit with you, have a chance to go out there. Okay. If you have some questions, try. Mrs. Brennan knows lots and lots of things about the school and how it's changed. And this land at one time belonged to Mr. Dunkerton. And he started out with the school here. So let's look at the questions that you already have posed here. I love all the names you have. I have to tell you that I've been throughout the museum. We have discussed the project they're having there. That's one of the places that I have volunteered to spend some time since I've been wanting to teach. Population of Dunkerton, when it first started, was only the Dunkerton people. Just Mr. and Mrs. Dunkerton and their children started there because there was no town there. But, I'm sorry, I don't know. I'm jumping into that. Okay? I'll see if I can find that out. Today I'm going to go to the senior citizens dinner. The fourth graders are singing there today, and so I'm going to see if I can find some people that will answer some of those questions. Population now is about 725, have you found that out? Who would answer that? Who would be a good one, Jay, to answer that? Jay's dad, sure. You would know. How big do you think a town has to be considered a town then? Time they got the railroad in, and then the general store and the hardware things and those kinds of things go out. The McMillans, where's the man at? About the store downtown? Was it where the electric one is, or was it next door? They had a general store. When I first came to teach in Dunkerton, that was the general store. You walked up through the steps and went down the old wooden floors, and they had everything. Now if you want to go to town, they want some buttons. Okay, go to Crossroads. I couldn't find a store that I could think of in Crossroads Center that I could buy buttons. Get your card, go to the fabric store. You went to McMillan's, they sold everything. Overhauls, your shoes, your bread, your butter, your buttons, everything. It was just marvelous to go in there. I would say that I think Jerry Smith's building there is the one in town. It's one of his first ones. The first business in town, I'm not going to tell you that, but you can look at here. It tells you there. You have to decide about how big they were. And how the depression would have. What year was it founded? That information is also in here. Oh, that's not, I thought this was easy to understand how it was after. School colors. Why would the school colors be red and black? How do you get school colors? Didn't I have it here? I don't get that. And once you get them, way back when, they stay that way. Not very often do school colors change. School I went to was blue and gold, and they're still blue and gold. The only time they change is when two schools merge, and usually neither one of them want to get it up there, so we end up having to say, okay, we're going to go to purple and blue. James Dunkerton came from Illinois. When was the bank built? Which bank are you talking about? Because this bank was built after I came to Dunkerton. And the bank, you know where the lot is with the board with all of the servicemen's name on it? That's where the bank was when I first came to Dunkerton. And you might not know this, that no new businesses can be built down in that area because it's in the floodplain. So that's why they started up here with telephone company and those kinds of things. The mini mart did come in down there, and I don't know how they happened to get a permit because already at that time they had water for over years. 100 years. most of the buildings on Main Street and down that street were water in their basements or up into their houses. Raider mascot. That's interesting. I'd like to know how come they chose a Raider guy. It's a whole lot better than, I like him better than I do a Panther. I like him better than I do a Hawkeye because I think a Raider is ready to go and conquer his dreams. I'm not sure a Panther has dreams. I heard a Hawkeye can conquer his in El Paso. I have to tell you this. This is irrelevant. My daughter was born in El Paso, so I've been to the Sun Bowl. Why did you pave the roads? I don't know, but I'm sure glad my car doesn't have to drive over those wagon trails and the railroad. Tell me why you think they needed a railroad, Mr. Webb.
Well, to ship goods back and forth.
What kind of goods, in Mr. Dunkerton's day, what kind of goods did they need to ship? Evan,
Baby fluid or feed to the animals.
most of the things they grew themselves. What's one thing that you know by watching Westerns, I get all my information from Westerns, what did they always have to be sure that they took with them? Any of those people that were going along the trail and camping out and so forth, what kind of things did they always take with them? This young man's one I don't know. Can you tell me?
Okay, the last few minutes of the tape, we're going to let Mrs. Hahn kind of point you in some directions that might be helpful in our exploration of Dunkerton and the surrounding area, and we'll let her kind of discuss some things, and remember, we can always get a hold of her at any time to help with this project.
One of the kinds of things that I would know that about Dunkerton is the Nature Center. Shirley Jones's great-grandfather, of course, owns that piece of land, and so now it belongs to Shirley Jones and Marilyn Chapman. And the house that sits right at the edge of the creek on this side, which is the south side of the creek, used to belong to Marilyn Chapman. And then across the 15 acres of land across the creek belongs to Marilyn Chapman. And I cannot tell you the year, but I can tell you the students that were in high school at that time. Jane Sickelko, Dan Jensen, Matt Schiller. I have a list of all of these students still in my file. They asked them as a tag group, what would you be interested in doing? If you could do anything at all that you'd want to do, what would you be interested in doing? And Matt Schiller's answer, along with others, if I had a piece of land, I would like to develop it. Well, at that time, I knew about this piece of land, and I went to Marilyn Chapman and said, how about letting us do something down at the creek? And she said, sure. So we went to the Blackhawk County Conservation Office at that time, asked them to come and help us, and the PE teacher at that time was Glenn Larson, and she then took over the tag group in high school, and they went down in their extra time. They very seldom did they get to take school time. They surveyed with sextant, the tripod, is that what you call that, on a tripod? They went down and surveyed, and on graph paper made grids, and at each point of where they crossed over, they checked out what kind of trees there were. They listed all those trees. Then they discussed and talked about what they wanted to do. We put up wood duck houses. And the elementary did a lot of that making of the wood duck houses. And then their great goal was to build a swinging bridge off the end of, is that Sycamore? No, what street is that? That goes down from the Tower Street, right straight out the back door, down and across by,
It is Sycamore.
yeah, down that way. They wanted a swinging bridge down there so that we could walk down this street back here out the back door and go right out and go across into the Nature Center. Well, those are great dreams, and it takes a lot of financing, so those things didn't happen, but those students had a marvelous time. And then they set up tours of the Nature Center,
And we had a reporter come in from Des Moines Register and took pictures while they were taking fourth grade classes through there. And they even had classes from Orange and Tripola come down and go through our nature center at that time. And we had a audio tape that if you didn't know the area and wanted to go through without a teacher or a student, you could take a tape walk through, because they had made big rounds of trees about that thick and had put numbers in them. So that all disappeared then later on, because the people in the area took shotguns and blew all of our birdhouses and everything we put down there. And we haven't done that since. So then it was about 10 years ago that we got the railroad, and Black Hawk County Conservation officers called me and said, we have a prairie area out here that's never been turned over. We are one of the few unique towns in Iowa that has a patch of prairie that has never seen a plow. And it's out there by the railroad, and when the railroad came through the town at an angle, and most of the field fences are very straight, that left this 4 acres of prairie out there that nobody claimed. And so they leased the railroad, the Chicago Great Western then, leased the railroad to me through the school. And the Black Hawk County Conservation Office said, we will help you manage it. And they come out and burn every couple of years for us. And so again, Dunkerton has some very unique things that the school has available for them right, in their backyard. And we need to see if we can utilize them a little bit more. So anytime anybody wants to go to the prairie, give me a ring. They have big blue stems and things like that are still there, the same as when the pioneers came. So, I'm not sure that I know a lot of the other kinds of things. Of course, there was only one man down here in this picture, that one man, because at the beginning, way back, very few people went to school. To start out with, then you only went to 8th grade. So eventually they got to high school, and that particular year there only happened to be one person that was a senior. So, and girls weren't expected to go, so half the time it was just the boys that were in school. Later on it was, thank goodness, it was girls too.
One question, do you know anything about, you talked a little bit about the businesses.
Mm-hmm.
What, the town's first business, do you know anything about that, or is that something that we're gonna have to
Yeah,
look into a
research
little more?
mostly. I believe it was a hardware store, but at the same time, there was a general merchandising store that was one of the first ones that went up, those first two on either side. And then a lot of the businesses have changed. Now, there's in town, Mr. Bartholomew, I think his wife is Mattie. No, that doesn't seem right either. He still operates a blacksmith shop down here, right at the edge of Sharman Park. And we stopped there one day and visited with him quite a while, and he talked about the things that he still does, because that's a trade that nobody has kept up, and there just aren't very many blacksmiths around. And of course, that's one of the kinds of things, if it hadn't been for somebody wanting to be a blacksmith, the John Deere plant would not have been here, because John Deere started out as a blacksmith in Vermont, traveled across to Decatur, Illinois. His blacksmith shop burnt down 4 or 5 times, but every time he built it, he said, I can build it a little better. So something always in your life to think about is build things a little better. And eventually he bought into the Waterloo Boy tractor company. He bought that tractor company and changed it over to Deere. So Dunkerton has a blacksmith shop,
Okay.
like John Deere did.
Another question that comes to my mind, because in the 3 years that I've been here, the bank was destroyed just not too long ago, as far as demolition. Do you know if anybody kept pieces from that?
Shirley Jones has the marble that came out of that bank, and that was the one thing that she kept. And she hasn't done anything with it because she's hoping that the town will place it down there where the bank was at, in that little park that they made that has all of the veterans' names on it. So that was one of the kinds, she wanted to save that big piece of marble and have some kind of a, put it up so that it was some kind of a monument, in probably cement or something that said James Dunkerton on it. So she still has that.
Okay, that's good. Why did they destroy it? It was just becoming.
Yes, they could not, in fact, somebody bought it after it was the bank. They bought it and were gonna remodel it. I'm not sure whether they were gonna make apartments out of it or, and then they found out the structure was just in such bad condition that they had to, the city made them destroy it then because the fellow had left, taken it apart, got ready to reconstruct it, found out that it wasn't a good investment, and then just left town and left it there, and they finally had to condemn it and get rid of it because it was a hazard to the town people.
You mentioned something also when you talked to the students about the floodplain. That's part of the reason why historically now the downtown area isn't like most towns, most small towns. And you mentioned the telephone company and the bank was moved up top now. Is that part of the reason then that Dunkerton really does not have a so-called main street? Not just because of the closeness to Waterloo, but because of the
No,
floodplain.
they will not. New businesses cannot. See, that's the Pony Express up there and the chiropractors. And well, of course, Mr. Hopley then put that, that was part of when he drew up the plans for his complex over there, that he put that in so that there was a place, because they no longer will allow anybody to build down there. I was really surprised that the post office built their new building, but see, it was downtown on that main street before, and they built, but I suppose that it was up just enough higher that they allowed them to go ahead and build, and they didn't need a basement. So, but anything that's down on that main street going across, even the houses were full, clear up onto the first floor with water that one year. Lloyd Simister would be a very good person to contact about the flood, because they moved, his wife was so upset. They had moved into their house there, and they eventually then they built up here right on the corner behind the school, because she said, I'll never go through that again. So it was a mess.
Okay. I guess maybe the last thing, and maybe Mrs. Rathe has something she might want to ask, but what final bit of advice would you tell these students? I think your introduction about goal setting was great, but what bit of advice would you tell them as they're digging in something, and if they don't turn up what they want, your advice, you've had a lot of them and you've touched a lot of their lives already, but if things get frustrating for them as they're doing this project, what would you tell them?
Well, keep digging and keep asking, of course, but if you run into a brick wall, walk around it. You may not find out everything that you want to know, but then think about how much you have learned, and the fact that to go on, to have pride in yourself, you need to have pride in your area that you live in, and by knowing the history and the background of Dunkerton and how hard it was for these people to come all the way across from Illinois and walk through prairie land where the grass was 10 feet tall. They just gave this to you. You're not going to have near that tough a time here in town. Take pride in that. But no, going on, you're going to have those same kind of stumbling blocks. Yeah, but keep going. Keep going.
Okay. Thank you very much.
Thank you.